The rain hammered against the pavement like 1,000 tiny drummers, relentless and unforgiving. Destiny Williams pushed through the hospital's automatic doors, her dark green scrubs already damp from the humidity that clung to everything in the city that night. 12 hours. 12 hours of back-to-back trauma cases, 2 codes, and one particularly difficult family who couldn't understand why their grandmother wasn't responding to treatment the way they'd seen on television medical dramas. Her feet ached with a bone-deep weariness that seemed to pulse with every heartbeat, and her eyes burned from the fluorescent lights she'd been working under since before dawn. She fumbled in her bag for her phone, squinting at the screen through the sheets of water cascading from the hospital's awning. The rideshare app showed a black BMW waiting in the pickup zone, and she could barely make out the shape of a dark sedan idling about 50 feet away. Perfect. All she wanted was to collapse into the back seat, close her eyes, and let someone else worry about navigating through this monsoon. She pulled her jacket over her head and sprinted toward the vehicle, her sneakers splashing through puddles that soaked through to her socks immediately. The car was sleek, expensive-looking, with tinted windows that revealed nothing of its interior. She yanked open the back door and threw herself inside, gasping with relief as the warmth of the heated seats enveloped her exhausted body. Thank God, she breathed, settling into the leather interior that smelled faintly of sandalwood and something else she couldn't quite identify. I thought I was going to drown out there. You can just take me to Maple Street, the apartment complex on the corner. She didn't wait for a response, already fishing through her bag for her earbuds, her eyes half closed against the dim interior lighting. The car was nicer than any rideshare she'd ever been in, but she was too tired to question it. Maybe the driver was new, trying to make a good impression. Maybe he was one of those guys who drove luxury vehicles on the side for extra cash. Either way, she didn't care. She just wanted to go home. The partition between the front and back seats was up, tinted glass obscuring whoever was driving, and Destiny barely registered the figure sitting in the passenger seat beside her until she'd already buckled her seatbelt and let her head fall back against the headrest. Her eyes fluttered open for just a moment, catching a glimpse of a man in a dark suit, his profile sharp and angular in the shadows. She should have said something. Should have apologized for not noticing him, asked if this was a shared ride situation. But her body had other plans. The warmth of the car, the gentle hum of the engine, the rhythmic drumming of rain against the roof, it all conspired against her consciousness. Her eyelids grew impossibly heavy, and before she could form another coherent thought, Destiny Williams was asleep. Jae-won Kong had not become the head of the Kong family's operations by being easily surprised. He had survived 3 assassination attempts before his 30th birthday, had navigated the treacherous waters of Seoul's underworld before expanding to the American market, and had built a reputation for being as calculating as he was ruthless. But when a woman in dark green medical scrubs threw herself into his car, rattled off an address like he was her personal chauffeur, and then promptly fell asleep against his shoulder, he found himself experiencing something dangerously close to bewilderment. He sat perfectly still, his hand frozen halfway to the weapon concealed beneath his jacket, watching as this stranger's breathing deepened into the unmistakable rhythm of genuine sleep. In the driver's seat, his most trusted associate, Min-jun, had gone rigid, eyes darting to the rearview mirror with an expression that suggested he was waiting for instructions that might involve disposing of an unexpected witness. Sir, Min-jun whispered, his Korean crisp and urgent. What do you want me to do? Jae-won studied the woman's face in the dim light. She was young, probably mid-20s, with dark skin that seemed to glow even in the shadows of the car's interior. Her hair was pulled back in a practical ponytail, and there were dark circles under her eyes that spoke of exhaustion far deeper than a single bad day. A hospital ID badge was clipped to her scrubs, and he could just make out the words, Memorial Hospital and Registered Nurse, above a photo that matched the face now resting dangerously close to his shoulder. She smelled like antiseptic and coffee, and there was a small stain on her sleeve that looked like it might be blood. Not a threat, then. Just a tired woman who had made a very unfortunate mistake. Drive, Jae-won said quietly, his eyes never leaving her face. Sir? Where? Just drive. Around the block. Slowly, he needed time to think, to assess the situation that had spiraled so quickly from routine to absurd. He had been waiting for a contact, a man who was supposed to deliver information about a rival family's movements. That man was now 12 minutes late, and Jaewon had been contemplating the various ways he might express his displeasure when this woman had appeared like some kind of fever dream. The car pulled smoothly away from the curb, and Jaewon watched as the hospital lights faded in the rain-streaked rear window. The woman stirred slightly, murmuring something unintelligible, and then settled more firmly against his arm. He should wake her. Should demand to know who she was and why she had invaded his space with such careless abandon. But something stopped him, perhaps the vulnerability in her sleeping face, or the way her hands were still clutched around her bag like she was afraid someone might take it even in her dreams. He had seen that kind of exhaustion before, in the faces of people who worked themselves to the bone because they had no other choice. It was not a look that belonged to someone who posed any kind of threat. The situation was, objectively, ridiculous. Here he was, a man who commanded fear and respect in equal measure across 2 continents, sitting in the back of his own car while a complete stranger used him as a pillow. If any of his rivals could see him now, they would laugh themselves sick before trying to put a bullet in his head. Min-jun was clearly thinking something similar, his shoulders tight with suppressed tension as he navigated through the rain-slicked streets. But Jaewon found that he wasn't angry. Annoyed, certainly. Inconvenienced, absolutely. But there was something almost refreshing about being treated like an ordinary person, even if it was only because this woman had no idea who he was. When was the last time someone had looked at him, or in this case, not looked at him, and seen anything other than a threat to be feared or an asset to be exploited? 20 minutes passed, then 30. The woman slept on, oblivious to the danger she was in, oblivious to the increasingly concerned glances Min-jun kept shooting toward the back seat. Jaewon's contact had called twice, and he had silenced his phone both times, unwilling to risk waking her until he had decided what to do. It was a strange kind of paralysis, one he didn't fully understand. He told himself it was strategic, that he needed to know why she had chosen his car, whether it was truly an accident or something more sinister. But the truth was simpler and more unsettling. He was curious. Curious about this woman who slept so trustingly in the presence of a monster who had walked into the lion's den and made herself comfortable without a second thought. At 43 minutes, she began to stir. Jaewon watched her eyelids flutter, watched consciousness return to her features in slow, reluctant stages. She yawned, stretched slightly, and then froze as her brain finally caught up with her surroundings. Her eyes went wide, and he saw the exact moment she realized that the shoulder she'd been sleeping on did not belong to anyone she knew. "Oh my God," Destiny breathed, jerking upright so fast she nearly gave herself whiplash. Her heart was suddenly pounding against her ribs like it was trying to escape, and her hand flew to her chest as if she could physically hold it in place. The man beside her was watching her with an expression she couldn't read, dark eyes that seemed to absorb the light rather than reflect it, a face that could have been carved from stone for all the emotion it showed. He was beautiful in a dangerous way, the kind of beautiful that made you want to look closer even as every instinct screamed at you to run. "I am so sorry. I thought this was my Uber. I was so tired. I didn't even." She stopped, her words dying in her throat as she took in her surroundings more carefully. This was not an Uber. The interior was too luxurious, too deliberately designed for someone who valued privacy above all else. And the man beside her was wearing a suit that probably cost more than 3 months of her rent. "This isn't my Uber, is it?" "No," Jaewon said, and his voice was like velvet over steel, smooth and soft with something harder underneath. "It is not." Destiny's hand moved instinctively toward the door handle, but the man made no move to stop her. He simply sat there, watching her with those unreadable eyes, waiting to see what she would do. The car was still moving, she realized, still gliding through streets she didn't recognize. How long had she been asleep? Where had they taken her? Panic began to claw at the edges of her consciousness, but she forced it down with the same iron will that had gotten her through nursing school while working 2 jobs. Panic wouldn't help her now. She needed to think, needed to assess the situation like she would assess a patient in crisis. "Who are you?" she asked, and she was proud of how steady her voice came out. "And where are we going?" Jaewon tilted his head slightly, studying her like she was a puzzle he couldn't quite solve. Those are excellent questions, he said. I've been asking myself similar ones for the past 45 minutes, he paused, letting the weight of that number sink in. You have been asleep for quite some time. I was beginning to think you might never wake up. 45. Destiny's voice cracked, and she had to swallow hard before she could continue. You let me sleep in your car for 45 minutes? Why didn't you wake me up? Why didn't you? She stopped again, another realization hitting her like a freight train. Oh God. You're not going to kill me, are you? Because I really don't know anything. I'm just a nurse. I work at Memorial Hospital. I thought this was my ride home. I swear I didn't see anything. I don't know anything. I just want to go home and sleep in my own bed and forget this ever happened. The corner of J1's mouth twitched. Not quite a smile, but something close to it. If I wanted to kill you, he said calmly, you would already be dead. The fact that you are still breathing should tell you something about my intentions. He reached into his jacket, and Destiny flinched, but all he produced was a phone. Your address was Maple Street, yes? The apartment complex on the corner? She nodded mutely, not trusting her voice. He spoke something in Korean to the driver, and the car changed direction smoothly, heading toward a part of the city she finally recognized. You're taking me home? She asked, disbelief coloring every syllable. It seems like the simplest solution to a very unusual problem, J1 replied. Unless you would prefer I drop you somewhere else?
No.
No, home is good. Home is great. Destiny pressed herself against the door, trying to put as much distance between herself and this strange, terrifying, inexplicably courteous man as the confined space would allow. I really am sorry about the car thing, and the sleeping thing, and She gestured vaguely at his shoulder. That thing. I worked a 12-hour shift, and I was so tired I could barely see straight, and your car looked exactly like the one in my app, and I didn't think. Clearly, J1 said, but there was no malice in his voice. If anything, he sounded almost amused. Tell me, do you make a habit of getting into strange cars without checking to see who's inside? No, Destiny said defensively. I mean, not usually. This was a one-time thing. A very unfortunate, never to be repeated, one-time thing. She paused, a horrible thought occurring to her.
Wait.
If this isn't a rideshare, and you were just sitting here waiting for someone, then who were you waiting for? And why were you parked outside a hospital at midnight? The question hung in the air between them, and Destiny watched as something flickered behind J1's eyes, something that looked almost like respect. Most people in her situation would be too terrified to ask questions. They would sit in trembling silence, grateful to be alive, and the seconds until they could escape. But this woman, this exhausted nurse in her blood-stained scrubs, was looking at him with something that resembled genuine curiosity. That, J1 said slowly, is not something you need to concern yourself with. Right. Of course. None of my business. Destiny nodded quickly, recognizing the warning in his tone. I'm just going to sit here quietly and wait until we get to my apartment, and then I'm going to get out of this car and never speak of this again. Sound good?
Great. Perfect.
That's the plan. But even as she said it, she couldn't help stealing glances at the man beside her. There was something about him that didn't quite fit the image she was trying to construct in her mind, the image of a dangerous criminal who had inexplicably decided to spare her life. He was too calm, too controlled, too almost gentle in the way he spoke to her. And he had let her sleep on his shoulder for 45 minutes without waking her, which was either the most threatening thing she'd ever heard or the strangest act of kindness she'd ever experienced. She couldn't decide which, and the uncertainty was making her head spin. The car pulled to a stop outside her apartment building, and Destiny nearly sobbed with relief. Home. Safety. A door she could lock between herself and whatever madness she had stumbled into tonight. She fumbled with the door handle, her hands shaking despite her best efforts to control them, and practically fell out onto the wet sidewalk. Thank you, she said, and then immediately felt ridiculous. Thank you for not killing me? Thank you for giving me a ride home after I accidentally invaded your personal space. What was the appropriate etiquette for this situation? I mean, I'm sorry. Again. For everything. J1 leaned forward slightly, and the streetlight caught his face for the first time, illuminating features that were even more striking than she had realized. High cheekbones, a strong jaw, lips that seemed permanently set in a line that was neither smile nor frown. And those eyes, dark and deep and filled with secrets she couldn't begin to fathom. "Be more careful," he said quietly. "The next car you stumble into might not be so forgiving." The door closed, and the BMW pulled away, disappearing into the rain-soaked night like it had never been there at all. Destiny stood on the sidewalk for a long moment, her scrubs plastered to her skin, her heart still racing, trying to convince herself that the last hour had actually happened. Then she turned and walked into her building, already composing the text she would send to her best friend. "You will never believe what just happened to me." But even as she typed the words, she knew she wouldn't send them. Some stories were too strange to share, too dangerous to speak aloud. And something told her that the man in the black BMW was the kind of secret that was better kept to herself. 3 days passed, and Destiny almost managed to convince herself that the whole thing had been some kind of exhaustion-induced hallucination. She went to work, she came home, she slept and ate and existed in the comfortable routine she had built for herself. The man in the car became a strange memory, fading at the edges like a dream she couldn't quite hold on to. She didn't tell anyone about him. Not her coworker Priscilla, who would have insisted on calling the police. Not her mother, who would have demanded she move back home immediately. Not even her journal, which had heard every other secret she'd ever kept. It felt too private somehow. Too strange, and too intimate to put into words. On the 4th day, everything changed. She was walking out of the hospital after another brutal shift, her eyes fixed on her phone as she double-checked the license plate of her actual rideshare this time, when a black BMW pulled up to the curb directly in front of her. Her heart stopped, then started again at twice its normal speed. The window rolled down, and a familiar face appeared, not the man from the back seat, but the driver, his expression carefully neutral. "Miss Williams," he said, and the fact that he knew her name sent ice through her veins. "Mr. Kong would like to speak with you." "Mr. Kong," Destiny repeated, her voice flat. "And who exactly is Mr. Kong?" "The man whose shoulder you slept on 3 nights ago," came a voice from inside the car, and despite everything, despite the fear and the confusion, and the very reasonable certainty that getting into this vehicle again would be the worst decision of her life, Destiny felt something flutter in her chest that had nothing to do with terror. "I promise I won't bite." Destiny stood frozen on the sidewalk, her rideshare app still glowing on her phone screen, showing a silver Honda Civic that was definitely not the sleek black BMW idling in front of her. Every rational thought in her head screamed at her to walk away, to get into her actual ride and go home and pretend this wasn't happening. But her feet wouldn't move, and her eyes kept drifting back to the open window, to the shadowy figure she could just barely make out in the back seat. 3 days. He had waited 3 days, and then he had come back.
Why?
What could a man like him possibly want with a nurse who had accidentally fallen asleep in his car? "I don't think that's a good idea," she said, and she was proud of how steady her voice came out, even though her hands were trembling so badly she nearly dropped her phone. "I have a ride coming. A real ride. One that I actually ordered." "Cancel it," J1 said, and there was something in his tone that made it sound less like a command and more like an invitation. "I only need a few minutes of your time. Consider it an apology for frightening you the other night." "You didn't frighten me," Destiny lied, and she could have sworn she heard a soft laugh from inside the car. "Then you're either very brave or very foolish." "I haven't decided which." The door swung open, revealing the interior she remembered all too well. The leather seats, the subtle lighting, the man who sat like a king surveying his domain. He was dressed differently tonight, more casually, in a dark sweater that somehow made him look more approachable and more dangerous at the same time. "Please." "I insist." Against every instinct, against every lesson her mother had ever taught her about strange men and stranger situations, Destiny found herself moving toward the car. She told herself it was curiosity, pure and simple. She told herself that if he had wanted to hurt her, he would have done it already. She told herself a lot of things in those few seconds, but the truth was simpler and more terrifying. She wanted to know. She wanted to understand who this man was and why he had come back for her, and that wanting was stronger than any fear she had ever felt. She slid into the back seat, and the door closed behind her with a soft click that sounded entirely too final. The car began to move immediately, pulling away from the hospital and into the evening traffic, and Destiny realized with a start that she had no idea where they were going. Again, she really needed to work on her self-preservation instincts. "You know my name," she said, breaking the silence that had settled between them. "You know where. I'm guessing you know a lot more than that." Too, she turned to face him, forcing herself to meet those dark, unreadable eyes. "So, who are you, Mr. Kong? And what do you want with me?" Jae-won studied her for a long moment, and Destiny had the uncomfortable sensation of being weighed and measured, evaluated against some standard she couldn't see. Then he smiled, a real smile, small but genuine, and the effect was startling. It transformed his face, softening the sharp edges and making him look almost human. "You're direct," he said. "I appreciate that. Most people are too afraid to ask me questions." "Most people probably have better survival instincts than I do," Destiny replied, and Jae-won's smile widened slightly. "Perhaps. Or perhaps they simply lack your courage." He leaned back against the seat, his posture relaxed in a way that seemed deliberate, like he was trying to put her at ease. "To answer your question, my name is Jae-won Kong. I run several businesses in this city, some of which are more legitimate than others. And as for what I want with you," he paused, and something flickered in his eyes that she couldn't quite identify. "I'm not entirely sure. You've been on my mind since that night, and I've learned to trust my instincts when they tell me someone is worth paying attention to." "Worth paying attention to?" Destiny repeated, incredulity creeping into her voice. "I fell asleep in your car. I drooled on your probably very expensive suit. That's not exactly the foundation for a meaningful connection." "You didn't drool," Jae-won said, and there was definite amusement in his voice now. "I would have noticed." "Oh, well, that's a relief. At least I maintained some dignity while accidentally kidnapping myself." She shook her head, a disbelieving laugh escaping her lips. "This is insane. You know that, right? This whole situation is completely insane." "Perhaps," Jae-won agreed. "But I've found that the most interesting things in life often are." He reached into his pocket and produced a business card, holding it out to her between two fingers. "I have a proposition for you, Miss Williams. One that I think you might find beneficial." Destiny took the card automatically, glancing down at the elegant script that spelled out his name and a phone number. Nothing else. No job title, no company name, no indication of what exactly this man did when he wasn't picking up wayward nurses from hospital parking lots. "What kind of proposition?" "I need a nurse," Jae-won said simply. "Someone with medical training who can provide discreet care for certain members of my organization. The work would be well compensated, and the hours would be flexible enough to accommodate your current position at the hospital." He paused, watching her face carefully. "I should be clear, I'm not asking you to do anything illegal. No treating gunshot wounds and lying to the police, nothing like that. But there are times when my associates require medical attention that they would prefer not to seek through traditional channels. Minor injuries, mostly. The kind of thing that would raise questions if they showed up at an emergency room." Destiny stared at him, her mind racing through the implications of what he was suggesting. On one hand, it sounded like exactly the kind of arrangement that could get her license revoked and destroyed. On the other hand, he was offering her money, probably a lot of money, based on everything she had seen of his lifestyle, and the chance to help people who might otherwise go without care. It was a moral gray area the size of the Grand Canyon, and she had no idea which side she should land on. "Why me?" she asked finally. "You could hire someone with more experience, someone who already knows your world. Why track down the random woman?" Jae-won was quiet for a moment, and when he spoke, his voice was softer than she had here. "Because you weren't afraid of me," he said. "Not really. Even woke up and realized where you were, even that you were in danger. You didn't panic. You asked questions. You tried to understand the situation instead of simply reacting to it." He met her eyes, and there was something almost vulnerable in his gaze. "Do you know how rare that is? How few people can look at someone like me and see anything other than a threat." "Maybe I'm just too tired to be properly scared," Destiny said, but her voice lacked conviction. "Maybe," Jae-won agreed. "Or maybe you see things that other people miss. Either way, I think you could be valuable to me. And I always take care of the people who are valuable to me." The car had stopped, Destiny realized, and she looked out the window to see her apartment building looming outside. They had driven in a complete circle, bringing her right back where she started. It felt symbolic somehow, like the universe was giving her a choice. Step out of this car and return to her normal life, or stay and see where this strange path might lead. I need to think about it, she said, and Jaewon nodded as if he had expected nothing less. Take all the time you need. My number is on the card. Call me when you've made your decision. He reached past her to open the door, and for a moment, his face was close enough that she could see the individual threads of silver in his dark hair, could smell the subtle cologne that clung to his skin. But Destiny? Don't take too long. Opportunities like this don't come around often. She stepped out of the car on legs that felt like they belonged to someone else, clutching the business card so tightly that its edges dug into her palm. The BMW pulled away, and she watched its taillights disappear around the corner, her heart pounding with something that felt dangerously like anticipation. She should throw the card away. She should forget this ever happened and go back to her safe, predictable life. But even as she thought it, she knew she wouldn't. Couldn't. Because Jaewon Kong had seen something in her that no one else had ever noticed, and she needed to know what it was. 2 weeks later, Destiny found herself standing outside a nondescript building in a part of the city she had never visited before, wondering for the 100th time if she had completely lost her mind. She had called the number on the card 3 days after their conversation, her voice steady even as her hands shook, and Jaewon had answered on the first ring, as if he had been waiting for her. The instructions he gave her were simple: an address, a time, a promise that everything would be explained when she arrived. And now here she was, about to walk into a situation she didn't understand, working for a man she barely knew, all because something in his eyes had made her feel seen for the first time in years. The door opened before she could knock, revealing Minjun's familiar face. He looked different in the daylight, less intimidating, though there was still a wariness in his eyes that suggested he hadn't quite decided what to make of her. "Miss Williams," he said, stepping aside to let her enter. "Mr. Kong is expecting you." The interior of the building was nothing like she had expected. Instead of the dark, intimidating spaces she had imagined, all shadows and secrets and men with guns, she found herself in what looked like a perfectly ordinary medical clinic. There were examination rooms with proper equipment, a small pharmacy stocked with supplies, even a waiting area with comfortable chairs and magazines. It was clean and professional and utterly mundane, and Destiny felt some of the tension drain from her shoulders as she took it all in. Impressed. Jaewon's voice came from behind her, and she turned to find him leaning against a doorframe, watching her with that same unreadable expression she remembered from their first meeting. "Surprised," she admitted. "I was expecting something more. I don't know. Criminal?" Jaewon laughed, a genuine sound that transformed his face in ways she was beginning to find dangerously attractive. "I told illegal. This clinic serves my employees and their families, people who work hard and deserve quality healthcare, without the bureaucracy of the traditional system. You'll be treating sprained ankles and flu symptoms, not extracting bullets." "And the discreet care you mention?" His expression sobbed, "My work creates enemies. And enemies express their displeasure in physical ways. That happens. My people need someone they can trust to patch them up without asking too many questions." He moved closer herself to hold her ground even as her heart rate accelerated. "Can you do that, Destiny? Can you help people without needing to know every detail of how they got hurt?" She thought about it, really thought about it, turning the question over in her mind like a stone she was examining for flaws. It went against everything fundamental principle that understanding a patient history was essential to providing good care. But she also knew that wasn't as simple as her textbooks had made it seem. Sometimes that the system couldn't or wouldn't provide. Sometimes the choice between right and wrong, but between bad and worse. "I can try," she said finally. "But conditions." Jaewon raised an eyebrow, looking more intrigued than offended. "Name them. If someone comes in with an injury that's life-threatening, I'm calling an ambulance. I don't care how many questions it raises or how much trouble it causes. I won't let someone protect your secrets." She met his eyes, refusing away. "And if I ever find out that you've lied to me, that this clinic is being used for something harmful, I'm gone. No negotiation. No second chances. I walk away, and I never look back. For a long moment, J1 simply looked at her, and Destiny had the unsettling feeling that he was seeing straight through her, reading every thought and fear and hope that flickered through her mind. Then he smiled, that same small, genuine smile she had seen in the car, and extended his hand.
Deal, he said.
Welcome to the team, Miss Williams. She shook his hand, feeling the warmth of his palm against hers, and tried to ignore the spark that seemed to pass between them at the contact. This was a business arrangement, nothing more. She was here to help people, to use her skills in a way that might actually make a difference. Whatever else she might be feeling, the curiosity, the attraction, the strange sense of connection that had been building since that rainy night, she would have to keep it locked away, hidden where it couldn't complicate things. But as J1 led her through the clinic, introducing her to the staff and explaining the systems they had in place, Destiny couldn't help noticing the way his hand lingered on her back as he guided her through doorways. Couldn't help noticing the way his eyes kept finding hers across the room, holding her gaze for just a moment too long. And she couldn't help wondering if maybe, just maybe, she wasn't the only one feeling something she shouldn't. The first month passed in a blur of activity and adjustment. Destiny fell into a rhythm, splitting her time between the hospital and the clinic, learning to navigate the strange new world she had entered. The patients who came to see her were exactly as J1 had described: ordinary people with ordinary problems, workers and family members who needed care but couldn't afford the time or expense of traditional healthcare. She treated ear, gave vaccinations and checked blood pressure, and slowly began to feel like she was making a real difference in people's lives. The other cases, the ones that came with bruises that looked like knuckles and cuts that looked like knives, were rarer than she had expected. When they did appear, she treated them with the same professionalism she applied to everything else, asking only the questions that were medically relevant and keeping her thoughts about the rest to herself. It was a compromise she had made with her conscience, a line she had drawn that allowed her to do good without becoming complicit in harm.
Most days it felt like enough.
But it was the time between patients that proved most dangerous. The conversations with J1 that started about work and gradually drifted into other territories, childhood memories and favorite books, and the dreams they had abandoned along the way. The lunches they shared in his office, takeout containers spread across his desk while they debated everything from politics to pizza toppings. The moments when their eyes would meet and hold, charged with something neither of them was willing to name. Destiny told herself it was just friendship, just the natural connection that formed between people who spent time together. But she knew she was lying, and she suspected J1 knew it too. Everything changed on a Tuesday night in late October. Destiny was alone in the clinic, finishing up paperwork after a long day, when the door burst open and Minjun half-carried, half-dragged J1 through the entrance. There was blood everywhere. On J1's shirt, on Minjun's hands, pooling on the floor in a trail that led from the door to where they stood. Destiny's training kicked in immediately, her personal feelings shoved aside as she shifted into emergency mode. "What happened?" she demanded, helping Minjun get J1 onto an examination table. "Ambush," Minjun said, his voice tight with controlled panic. "They were waiting for us outside the restaurant. He took 2 hits before we could get him out." Destiny was already cutting away J1's shirt, her hands steady even as her heart raced. The wounds were bad, one in his shoulder, one in his side, but they weren't fatal. Not yet anyway. She worked quickly, cleaning and assessing, her mind running through the steps she needed to take to stabilize him. "I need to call an ambulance," she said, reaching for her phone. "These wounds need surgery." "I can't." J1's hand caught her wrist, his grip surprisingly strong for someone who had just lost so much blood. "No hospitals," he said, his voice strained but clear. "They'll be watching. If I show up in an emergency room, I'm dead. If I don't get you proper care, you're dead anyway." Destiny shot back, but she didn't pull away from his grip. "I'm good, J1, but I'm not a surgeon. I can't fix this with what I have here." "Then find another way." His eyes met hers, and she saw something there she had never seen before: fear. Not of death, she realized, but of something else. Of failing. Of leaving behind the people who depended on him. "Please, Destiny. I'm trusting you." She stared at him for a long moment, her mind racing through possibilities and discarding them just as quickly. Then she took a deep breath and made a decision that would change everything. Minjun, I need you to make a call. There's a surgeon someone who owes me a favor. She's retired now, but she still has her skills and her discretion. Tell her Destiny Williams needs her, and tell her to come alone. She turned back to Jaewon, already reaching for the supplies she would need to keep him stable until help arrived. And you're going to lie still and let me work, and you're going to stay conscious no matter how much it hurts. Do you understand me? Jaewon managed something that might have been a smile, though it was twisting, he said, and despite everything, Destiny felt a flutter of warmth in her chest at the words. The next 2 hours were the longest of her life. She worked with a focus hadn't known she possessed, cleaning wounds and applying pressure and monitoring vital signs while Minjun paced the hallway like a caged animal. The surgeon, Dr. Patricia Chun, a 63-year-old former trauma specialist who had saved Destiny's brother's life after a car accident 5 years ago, arrived within 40 minutes, her medical bag in one hand and a look of resigned exasperation on her face. When you said you needed a favor, I assumed you meant covering a shift or writing a recommendation letter, Patricia said as she surveyed the scene. Not performing emergency surgery in what appears to be an underground medical facility. I know, Destiny said, stepping aside to let the older woman take over. And I promise I'll explain everything later. But right now, I need to save this man's life. Patricia was already scrubbing in, her movements quick and efficient despite her years away from the operating room. You can assist. And when this is over, you and I are going to have a very long conversation about the choices you've been making. The surgery took 3 hours. Destiny assisted as best she could, handing instruments and monitoring readings and trying not to think about the fact that the man on the table had become far more important to her than she had ever intended. When it was finally over, when the bullets had been removed and the wounds had been closed and Jaewon was sleeping peacefully under the influence of the anesthesia Patricia had brought, Destiny allowed herself to collapse into a chair and breathe for what felt like the first time all night. He's going to be fine, Patricia said, stripping off her gloves and fixing Destiny with a penetrating stare. The shoulder will take time to heal, and he'll need physical therapy to regain full mobility, but there's no permanent damage. He's lucky you were here. Lucky, Destiny repeated, the word tasting strange in her mouth. I'm not sure luck had anything to do with it. Patricia sat down beside her, her expression softening slightly. You care about him, she said. It wasn't a question. I don't know what I feel, Destiny admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. Everything about this is wrong. He's dangerous, Patricia. The things he does, the world he lives in, I should be running as far and as fast as I can in the opposite direction. But every time I try to convince myself to leave, something pulls me back. And tonight, when I saw him bleeding out on that table, she stopped, unable to finish the sentence. You realized you couldn't imagine your life without him, Patricia said quietly. I know the feeling. I married a man like that once, a long time ago. Spent 30 years loving someone who lived in the shadows, who came home with bruises he wouldn't explain and secrets he couldn't share. She paused, her eyes distant with memory. It wasn't easy. There were times I wanted to walk away, times I wondered if I had made the biggest mistake of my life. But when he died, peacefully, in his sleep, after a long and happy retirement, I realized I wouldn't have traded a single moment. Not the fear, not the uncertainty, not any of it. Because the love we had was worth every sacrifice. Destiny looked at her, this woman she had known for years, but never really understood, and felt something shift inside her chest. How did you do it? She asked. How did you reconcile the person you loved with the things he did? I didn't, Patricia said simply. I accepted that he was complicated, that he existed in shades of gray rather than black and white. And I chose to focus on the parts of him that were good, his loyalty, his kindness, the way he looked at me like I was the only person in the world who mattered. She reached out and took Destiny's hand, her grip warm and reassuring. You can't change who he is, sweetheart. You can only decide whether you're willing to love him anyway. Jaewon woke up 3 days later, groggy and disoriented, but unmistakably alive. Destiny was there when his eyes opened, sitting in the chair beside his bed where she had spent most of the past 72 hours, and she watched as consciousness returned to his features in slow, painful stages. "You're still here," he said, his voice rough from disuse. "Where else would I be?" she replied, and something in her tone made him look at her more carefully, his dark eyes searching her face for answers to questions he hadn't yet asked. "You should have let me die," he said quietly. "It would have been easier for you. Safer." "Probably," Destiny agreed. "But I've never been very good at taking the easy road." She reached out and took his hand, feeling his fingers curl around hers with a strength that surprised her given everything he had been through. "We need to talk, Jaewon. About what this is, about what we're doing. Because I can't keep pretending that you're just my employer, and I don't think you can either." Jaewon was silent for a long moment, his thumb tracing circles on the back of her hand. When he spoke, his voice was softer than she had ever heard it, stripped of the careful control he usually maintained. "I have spent my entire life building walls," he said, "protecting myself from the people who wanted to use me, from the enemies who wanted to destroy me, from anyone who might get close enough to see the parts of me I've tried so hard to hide. And then you stumbled into my car, fell as my shoulder, and somehow managed to slip past every defense I had without even trying." He met her eyes, and she saw vulnerability there that took her breath away. "I don't know how to do this, Destiny. I don't know how to love someone without putting them in danger. But I know that I want to try, if you're willing to let me." Destiny felt tears prick at the corners of her eyes, emotions she had been suppressing for weeks finally breaking through the surface. "I'm scared," she admitted. "I'm terrified of what this means, of what it could cost me. But I'm more scared of walking away and spending the rest of my life wondering what might have been." She leaned forward, pressing her forehead against his, breathing in the scent of antiseptic and something underneath that was uniquely him. "So yes, Jaewon, I'm willing to let you try. As long as you're willing to let me try too." He kissed her then, soft and gentle and full of promise, and Destiny felt something click into place inside her chest like a key turning in a lock. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't safe. But it was real, and it was theirs, and for now, that was enough. The months that followed were a study in contrasts. There were moments of pure joy, lazy Sunday mornings in Jaewon's penthouse apartment, cooking breakfast together while music played softly in the background. Stolen kisses in the clinic between patients, quick touches that sent electricity through her veins. Long conversations that stretched into the early hours of the morning, sharing secrets and dreams and fears with an intimacy she had never experienced before. Jaewon opened up to her in ways she hadn't expected, telling her about his childhood in Seoul, about the father who had groomed him for leadership and the mother who had died trying to protect him from that fate. He told her about the choices he had made, the compromises that had shaped him into the man he was today, and she listened without judgment, accepting all of him even when it was hard. But there were darker moments too. Nights when Jaewon came home with shadows in his eyes and blood on his hands, when the weight of his responsibilities seemed to crush him from the inside out, when Destiny questioned everything, wondering if she was strong enough to stand beside him in a barely understood. The attack that had nearly only the beginning. There were others who wanted him, who saw his relationship with her as a weakness to be exploited. Shed to live with fear as a constant companion, to check over she walked to her car, to vary her routines so she couldn't be easily tracked. It was during one of these darker periods that everything came to a head. Jaewon had been distant for days, consumed by a conflict with rival organization that threatened everything he had built. Destiny watched Jae into himself. Watched the walls shed so hard to break down start to rebuild themselves brick by brick, and felt helpless to stop it. "Talk to me," she said one night, finding him standing at the window of his apartment, staring out at the city lights with an expression she couldn't read. "Whatever's happening, whatever you're dealing with, you don't have to face it alone." Jaewon turned to look at her, and the pain in his eyes nearly broke her heart. "They know about you," he said quietly. "The Yoon family. They've been watching you, following you. They know where you work, where you live, who your friends are." He paused, his jaw tightening. "They're going to use you to get to me, Destiny. And I don't know how to stop them without." He stopped, unable to finish the sentence. "Without what?" Destiny pressed, moving closer despite the warning in his eyes. "Without becoming the monster everyone already thinks I am." His voice cracked on the words, and she saw something she had never seen before. Jaewon Kong, the man who commanded fear and respect across 2 continents, was crying. Silent tears that tracked down his cheeks like confessions he couldn't hold back anymore. I've done terrible things to protect what's mine. I've hurt people, destroyed people, all in the name of survival. But this, he gestured between them at the space that had become sacred to both of them. This is the first good thing I've had in longer than I can remember. And I don't know how to protect it without losing the part of myself that makes me worthy of it. Destiny reached up and cupped his face in her hands, wiping away his tears with her thumbs. Listen to me, she said, her voice fierce with conviction. You are not a monster. You are a man who has had to make impossible choices in impossible circumstances. And yes, some of those choices have been wrong. Some of them have caused pain that can never be undone. But that doesn't define you, Jaewon. What defines you is what you do next. And what should I do next? He asked, his voice raw with desperation. You fight, Destiny said simply. Not alone, not in the shadows, but with me beside you. We figure this out together, find a way to protect ourselves without losing who we are. And if that means making changes, building something different than what came before, then we do that too. She pressed her lips to his forehead, feeling him tremble beneath her touch. I didn't sign up for easy, remember? I signed up for you. All of you, including the parts that scare me. Jaewon pulled her into his arms, holding her so tightly she could barely breathe, and she felt something shift between them. A decision being made, a path being chosen. When he finally spoke, his voice was steadier than it had been all night. There's a way, he said slowly, like he was thinking it through as he spoke. A way to end this without more bloodshed, without becoming what they want me to become. But it would mean giving up everything I've built, walking away from the power, the money, all of it. Starting over somewhere new, somewhere they can't find us. Could you do that? Destiny asked, pulling back to look at him. Could you really walk away from everything you've worked for? Jaewon met her eyes, and she saw something there she had never seen before. Hope. Fragile and uncertain, but real. For you, he said quietly, I could do anything.